During the Great Depression of the 1930s, the federal government came up with a creative new way to put unemployed writers back to work. Armed with tape recorders and lists of questions, members of the Federal Writers Project set out to record the experiences and opinions of everyday people. As a part of this project, thousands of former slaves in 17 states were interviewed. One result of these oral history interviews was the Slave Narrative Collection, an extraordinary set of 2,300 autobiographical documents now housed at the Library of Congress. These interviews, all of which were conducted between 1936 and 1938, gave former slaves an unparalleled chance to share their memories of life in bondage. Now, it's very rare to hear about the experiences of slavery from the mouths of actual, once-upon-a-time enslaved people. Thus, we are proud to present Columbia State's rendition of Unchained Memories, a production where you have the opportunity to listen to voices from enslaved people tell their own stories about their own experiences during slavery. By listening to these voices, you become a part of history in a way that not many get to experience. These slave narratives, in which they are called, have been compiled together by members of Columbia State's very own faculty, students, and staff. These are all authentic. Although some narratives have been condensed, none have been fictionalized. As mentioned, these narratives were recorded in the early 1900s, and many of the ex-slaves feared for their lives still to tell the truth about those who enslaved them. Their bravery is not to be dismissed nor diminished. When reading or listening to the narratives, it is important to remember the process by which the interviewees' words were recorded on paper. It is also important to remember the historical context in which the narratives were produced. Certain words that the former slaves used may be offensive or even disturbing. However, the narratives are a reflection of the time and place in which they were created. As such, they illuminate a world that is important for all Americans to explore. Thank you, and enjoy Slave Narratives, an adaptation of Unchained Memories.
When I was about 6 or 7 years old, I reckon it was Mr. Garrett bought 10 of us children in North Carolina and sent 2 white men to fetch us back in wagons. And he fetched old Julie Powell to look after us. They never bought my mammy, so I had to leave her behind. Mammy say to old Julie, "Take care of my baby child." That was me. And if I never sees her no more, raise her for God. Then she fell off the wagon where we was all sitting and just rolls on the ground, just a-crying. But us was eating candy that they done gave us to keep us quiet. I didn't have sense enough to know what all ailed Mammy, but I knows now. And I never sees her no more in this life. Her name was Rachel Powell.
My name is Frances Ann Kimball. My husband owns a rice and cotton plantation off the coast of Georgia. I've had several women at the house today asking for advice and help for their sick children. They all came from number 2, as they call it. That's the settlement, a cluster of Negro huts. In the afternoon, I went and found a great many of the children ailing. There had been an unusually high mortality among them at this particular settlement this winter. In one miserable hut, I heard that the baby was just dead. It was one of 13, many of whom had been, like itself, mercifully removed from the life of degradation and misery to which their birth had appointed them. And whether it was the frequent repetition of similar losses or an instinctive consciousness that death was indeed better than life in such children as theirs, I know not, but the father and the mother and the little baby's grandmother all seemed apathetic and apparently indifferent to the event. The mother merely repeated over and over again, I've lost so many. They all go so. And the father, without word or comment, went out to his enforced labor.
In early childhood, it was a source of unbounded pleasure for me to listen to the stories my mother would tell us of before the war. And none were quite so fascinating to me as those relating to her former slaves. When I heard how proficient they were, of the good things one could cook, the soft, pretty blankets and bedspreads another could weave, and how yet another could knit a pair of socks in one day, and do so many other things that seemed to me so wonderful. And I thought how wonderful it would have been to have had the services of such slaves.
As your governor, Robert Taylor, I welcome you to the 7th annual meeting and reunion of the United Confederate Veterans, 1897 in Nashville, Tennessee. I doubt if the world will ever see another civilization as brilliant as that which perished in the South and a third of a century ago. Its white columned mansions under cool, spreading groves, its cotton fields stretching away to the horizon, alive with toiling slaves who sang as they toiled from early morn to the close of the day. But the hurricane of Civil War shattered it and swept it away. But the Confederate soldier, the purest and proudest type of Anglo-Saxon race, stood erect amid that charred and blackened ruins. Slavery was dead, but magnificent in the gloom of defeat, he was still a master.
You got one pair of shoes a year, and when they wore out, we went barefooted. Sometimes us tied them up with strings, and they were so raggedy that the tracks looked like bird tracks when we walked in the road. My brother wore his shoes out and had none all through the winter. His feet cracked open and bled so bad, could track him by the blood in the snow. So you asked me about death, huh? When a slave died, Master sent a couple of niggers out to bury the body. And he say, "Don't be long, and no singing and praying loud." He say, "Put him in the ground, cover him up, hurry back in the field, you hear me?" Yes, sir, Master. Yes, sir.
Our nurses, we always called Mammy. It was not considered good manners to address any old Negro, man or woman, otherwise than as uncle or aunt. Adding the name, whatever that might be, the surname was always the master's. We were taught to treat them with respect. There were such kindly feelings on both sides between the owners and their slaves. Inherited kindly feelings. How could it be otherwise? Many were descendants of those who had served the same family for generations. For instance, the nurse who nursed my children was the daughter of my nurse, and her grandmother had nursed my mother. My maid, Virginia, I cannot recall a time when she was not my maid, was a very handsome young mulatto to whom I was especially attached. When she was married in her white dress and long veil flowing to her feet, the ceremony was performed in our back parlor. And Bishop Odie, the first bishop of Tennessee, officiated. How great the pride the Negroes felt in the warmth and importance of their owners, and interest indeed in all of their affairs, amusingly so sometimes. I recall an old woman, coal black, a red bandana tied over her kinky locks, and great dignity of manner, she said to me, "Young missus should marry her cousin, Master Tom, and keep our family likeness in our family."
I was born in Wilcox County, Alabama in 1850. W.J. Snow was my old master. All the niggas on the place were born in the family and were kin except my mom. She told me how they brought her from Africa. Seems like her chief made arrangements with some men, and they had a big goober grabbing of the young folks. They stole my mom and some more and brought them to this country. I don't remember anything about having a father. You know, honey, in them days, husband and wives didn't belong to the same folks. My mom said her husband was so mean that after we left Alabama, she didn't want to be married no more. We went to church with the white folks if we wanted. I didn't go much because I didn't have religion then. We didn't have any schooling. We could go to school with the white children if we wanted to, but nobody would teach us. I am educated, but I'm not educated in books. I'm educated by the kicks and bumps I got. I never knew what it was like to wear more than one garment until I was mostly grown. I never had a pair of shoes of my own. I got more whippings than any other nigga on the place because I was mean like my mammy. I was so bad that Master made me go look at the niggas they hung to see what they did to niggas that harm a white man.
There were different kinds of slave. The lazy fella who would not work at all unless forced to do so and was required to be watched. The good man who patiently submitted to everything. Then there was the unruly slave who no master wanted for several reasons. First, he would not submit to any kind of corporal punishment. Then there were thousands of that class who spent their lives in their master's service, doing his work undisturbed, because the master understood the slave. There were thousands of high-toned and high-spirited slaves who had as much self-respect as their masters and who were industrious, reliable, and truthful, and could be counted on in all cases. These slaves knew their own helpless condition.
I was born right here in Arkansas, about 9 miles down from Dardanelle in Yell County, about 75 miles away from here. But as you know, now I live here in North Little Rock. How old am I? I think I'm between 97 or 98 years old. I used to have it written in the family Bible, but it got burned up. They had an old age contest at the AME church in 1935, and the people all agreed I was the oldest colored woman in North Little Rock. They said I was 96 then, so that would make me 98 now. Yes, Lord, I remember about slavery. I ain't forgot about nothing. Now, things that happen now, I can't remember so well, but I can remember things that happened way back yonder. The first white owner that I had was Jackie George. He was just like an old shoe. Never whipped me but one time in my life. This is what he whipped me for. Me and my brother Sam had to water the horses. We had one old horse named John, big old horse. One day, I was leading old John back, and I got tired of walking. So I come up to a 10-rail fence. I got up on old John. I got up on him backwards. And I didn't have to hold on no bridle or nothing, 'cause I was looking at his tail. The others got back before we did. Old master said, "Where is Tilly?" They said, "She's coming, leading old John." After a while, one of them said, "There's Tilly now." Another one said, "Man, she's sitting on old John backwards." Old John was ambling along, nipping grass now and then, and I was slipping and sliding with every step. Old Mrs. come out the gate and met him herself, 'cause she was afraid the others would sight him and make him throw me down. She gentled him and led him up to old massa. They was careful and gentle till they got me off that horse, and then old master turned and lit into me and gave me a thrashing. That's the only whipping he ever give me. But that didn't do me no good. I rode old John every chance I could get, but I didn't ride him backwards no more.
I am Dr. Samuel Henderson. I own a plantation just southeast of Franklin, along the Lewisburg Pike. Being a slaveholder is hard. If you do not believe this to be true, hear these excerpts from my diary. November 27, 1856. Lewis, a boy about 14 years of age, died this day, occasioned by a burn which he had from falling into the fire when he had an epileptic fit. May 18th, 1857. Black girl Nancy died about 10 o'clock at night of pulmonary consumption, aged between 17 and 18 years. September 17th, 1857. My boy Jim died this morning after being sick with typhoid fever for near 6 weeks, aged about 20 years. It appears like I am under the frown of Providence, for I am losing all my Negroes and becoming poor. Lord, help me bear my misfortune without a murmur.
I had prayed that God would thwart his election in some way, and I prayed for my country. Lord, we know not what is to be the result of this, but I do pray if there is to be a crisis, that we all lay down our lives sooner than free our slaves in our midst. No soul on this earth is more willing for justice than I am, but the idea of being mixed up with free blacks is horrid. I must trust in God that he will not forget us, as unworthy as we are. Lord, save us. I would give my life to save my country. I have never been opposed to giving up slavery if we could send them out of our country. I have often wished I had been born in just such a country, with all our religious privileges and liberties, with none of them in our midst. If the North had let us alone, the master and the servant were happy without advantages. But we had vile wretches, ever making the restless worse than they would have been, and from my experience, my own Negroes are as happy as I am, happier. I am never cross to my servants without cause, and they give me impudence if I find the least fault. This is of the women, mind you. The men are not half as impudent as the women are. I have left a serious and what has been an all-absorbing theme to a common one, but the die is cast. Caesar has passed the Rubicon. We now have to act. God be with us is my prayer, and let us all be willing to die rather than free our slaves in their present uncivilized state.
When I was a child, I remember a story about my Aunt Janie. Aunt Janie was just out of bed with a suckling baby, and she ran away. She didn't come to the house to nurse her baby, so Mrs. and that old Solomon gets the nigger hounds to take to her trail. They gets near her, so she grabs a limb and tries to horse herself into a tree. But the dogs are hollering, and they're scratching, and they tore her naked. They ate her breast plumb off her body. She got well and lived to be an old woman, but another woman had to suck her baby, and she ain't got no sign of breast no more.
Oh, how my ears have been stunned today by the cry of the distressed. How bestial it is to whip the Negro so. Surely God will not wink at such cruelty. I feel sad. More whipping going on. One poor old man, the sufferer of a man's passion. Thank God my husband is not so heartless. It is indeed hard to bear to be compelled to stay where such is carried on daily. All are not like him here, He is the father of my husband, but I can never love him as much. I have no respect for him. He is too mean for anything.
My name is Betty Foreman. I was born July 11 in Raleigh, North Carolina. My mother was named Melinda Henley, slave of Governor Henley of North Carolina, and my father was named Arnold Foreman, slave of Bob and George Foreman, 2 young masters. I had 3 sisters and 2 brothers, and none of them was my whole brothers and sisters. Funny thing, I stayed in the big house all the time, but my sisters and brothers was given to the master's sons and daughters when they got married, and they was told to send back for some more when them died. I didn't never stay with my mammy during the slavery. Honey, I stayed in the big house. I slept under the dining room table with 3 other darkies. I stayed in the big house and waited on the table, kept flies off my mirrors, and went for the mail. Never made no money, but they did give slaves money at Christmas time. Now, child, I never got no learning. They kept us from that. I ate what the white folks ate, and they didn't eat no possums and rabbits, though they ate fish. Master had just 15 slaves on the place, and when his children come home every summer, they brung their own slaves. They brung 2 apiece. I saw 'em sell niggas once. The only person I ever seed whipped at that whipping post was a white man. The patty rollers sure watched the streets, but when they got caught, Master's niggas would just come out and lock them up in the guardhouse. Master come down in the morning and got her out. Patty rollers better not whip one. I know when the war commenced and ended. Yankees fell out of the very sky. They were everywhere you could look to save your life. Old Miss sent for one of her grandchildren to come, and one of those Yankees told that child, "You tell your grandmother she ain't coming now and never will come back here as a slave." I laid in my bed a many a night, scared to death of the Ku Klux Klan. They would come to your house and ask for a drink, and no more want for a drink than nothing. Prayer is the best thing in the world. Everybody ought to pray, 'cause prayer got us out of slavery. Freedom for us was the best thing to ever happen.
I saw today a sale of Negroes, mulatto women in silk dresses. One girl was on the stand, nice looking like my Nancy. She looked as coy and pleased as the bidder. South Carolina slaveholder as I am, my very soul sickened. It is too dreadful. I tried to reason. This is not worse than the willing sale most women make of themselves in marriage, nor can the consequences be worse. Under slavery, we live surrounded by prostitutes, like the patriarchs of old. Our men live all in one house with their wives and their concubines, and the mulattoes one sees in every family partly resemble the white children. Any lady is ready to tell you who is the father of all the mulatto children in everybody's household but her own. Those, she seems to think, drop from the clouds. Thank God for my countrywomen. But alas for the men. They are probably no worse than men everywhere, but the lower the mistresses, the more degraded they must be. The Bible authorizes marriage and slavery. Poor women, poor slaves.
Mistress Miller, she used to make my Aunt Caroline knit all day long. And when she'd get tired after dark, that she'd get sleepy, she'd make her stand up and knit. Mistress Miller would work her so hard that she'd go to sleep standing up. And every time her head would nod and her knees would sag, that lady come across her head with a switch. That's just the way white folks was. Some had hearts, some had gizzards for hearts.
In the midst of my own boyish enjoyments, I have suddenly thought of my poor little slave companions, how they had to work in the fields, how they were made to tote burdens under the summer's sun, what poor food they had, and with what raptures they would devour the cake with which I was pampering myself. Then I would become gloomy, embittered, and strangely anxious to inflict pain and privation on myself, and with vague enthusiasm would accuse the law that had made the lots of men so different. But the bitter experiences of life have cured these feelings. In its sad and painful struggles has expired my juvenile and false philosophy, and I have awakened to the calm, serious, profound conviction that every human lot has its sorrow and its agony. When will the world learn the plain lesson, wipe away all tears of sentimental sympathy, and adopt as the great rule of life that every man should bear his own burdens, that the object of sympathy is individual, and that it is equally senseless and sinful to sorrow over lots inferior to our own as to repine for and envy those which are superior? I venture to say that I have suffered more of unhappiness in a short worldly career than ever did my Uncle Jim or any other well-conditioned Negro slave in a whole lifetime.
My brother January was a big fine nigger. Fine nigger I'd ever seen, just 4 years older than me. And when Master began beating him, January never said a word. The master got madder because he could not make January holler. What's matter with you, nigga? Don't it hurt? January, he never said nothing, and the master kept beating him till little streams of blood started flowing down January's chest. But he ain't never hollered, his lips quivering, and his body was a-shaking, but his mouth he never opened. And all the while, I sat on my mammy and pappy steps just a-crying. The niggers were all gathered about, and some couldn't stand it, so they goes inside the cabins. And after a while, January, he couldn't stand it himself no longer. And in a loud whisper, "Massa, Massa, have mercy on this poor nigger."
I was one slave that the poor white man had his match. This here old white man said, what I can't do by fair means, I'll do by foul. One tried to throw me, but he couldn't. We tussled and knocked over chairs, and when I got a grip, I snatched his face all to pieces. And there was no more messing with Fanny. But oh, honey, some slave women had it hard. And when they resisted, the overseer would just kill you. Us colored women, I tell you, we had to go through plenty. Plenty, I tell you. Plenty.
Once two youngins go down the hill to the dollhouse where Master Kilpatrick's children are playing. They want to go into the dollhouse when one of Mr. Kilpatrick's boys say, "This here for white folk children." They say, "We ain't no niggers. We got the same daddy you has, and he comes to see us nearly every day and fetches us clothes and things from town. They just a fussing, and Mrs. Kilpatrick is listening to them out her chamber window. She heard them white niggas say, 'He our daddy. We call him daddy when he comes to our house to see our mama.'"
I was born in West Tennessee and was 6 years old when the war broke out. My missus was Mrs. Jenny McCullough. Her mother gave me, my mother, my sister Violet, and my brothers Andrew and Alfred to Miss Jenny as a wedding gift. My mother died the first year of freedom. They took her away in a 2-horse wagon. There were no hearses or caskets then. When my mother died, I still stayed with Miss Jenny. She raised me. That's why folks say I'm so peculiar.
I didn't have to do like the other children do. I remember quite well how them poor little children have to eat. They was fed in boxes and troughs under the house. They ate cornmeal mush and beans. When they was poured into their box, they would gather round it. They gather round it, same we see pigs, horses, and cattle gather around troughs today.
About sunup one morning, I saw an old Negro coming up the road. His body or skin looked more like the hide of an alligator than that of a human being. The large leaders in his legs had been cut just above the heels. The slave owners called this hamstringing to keep them from running away. This old darkey's body was one mass of scars from head to foot, where he'd been lacerated with whip and bloodhounds.
My name is Mary Peters, and my mother was a slave. My mother's mistress had 3 boys. One was 21, and one 19 and 17. One day, old mistress had gone away for the day, and she left my mother alone to work in the house. Those boys came in, and they threw her down on the floor, and they tied her down so that she could not struggle. And one after another, they used her for as long as they wanted for the whole afternoon. When old mistress came home, she wanted to know, "What's the matter with you, girl?" And she told her what those boys had done. And old mistress, she whipped them. But that's how I came to be here.
I's Marshall Butler, 88 years old, was born on December 25th. I know it was Christmas Day, for I's a gift to my folks. My mammy was a Frank Collins nigga, and her man was one of the tribe of Ben Butler, some miles down the road. It was one of them trial marriages. They tried so hard to see each other, but old Ben Butler said 2 passes a week was enough to see my mammy on the cotton plantation. Now, if a nigga went out without a pass, the patty rollers would get him. The white folks were the patty rollers. They used the straps with the belt buckles fastened on them. Oh, yes, sir. I got paddled. Happened this way. I left home one Thursday evening to see a gal on a palm plantation, about 5 miles away. Some gal. No, I ain't get no pass because the boss was so busy. Everything was fine until my return trip. I was 2 miles out, 3 miles to go, and here come the patty rollers. I was so scared, I couldn't move. Oh, they gave me 30 licks, and I ran through the rest of the way home, and I had belt buckles all over me. Ate my videos off the push running and all. Some gal. It was worth that pattern to see that gal. Do it all over again, see Mary Jane the next night. Jane, love me like you used to. Jane, choose me like you used to. Every time I feel good, my heart gets bigger. Sorry, can be your piper no more. That's some gal.
I hears tell of them good slave days, but I ain't never seen no good times then. My mother's name was Liza. I don't recollect nothing about my father. If I had any brothers and sisters, I didn't know it. I tended to the children when I was a little girl and tried to clean the house just like old Miss tell me. I recollects one time I was cleaning the house. I finds a biscuit, and I was so hungry I ate it, 'cause we never had such thing as a biscuit. We just have cornbread and syrup. When I ate that biscuit, she come in and says, "Where's that biscuit?" And I said, "Miss, I ate it 'cause I was so hungry." Then she grabbed that broom and started beating me all over the head with it and calling me low-down nigger. And I guess I just clean lost my head, 'cause I'd known better than to fight her if I'd known anything at all. But I starts to fight her. The driver, he comes in and starts to beat me with the cat o' nine tails, and beats me till I fall to the floor nearly dead. He cut my back all to pieces. Then they rub salt in the wounds for my punishment. Lord, Lord, honey, I still got them scars on my old back right now. Those were some rough days. What about learning? None of us was allowed to see a book or try to learn. They say we get smarter than they if we was to learn anything. But we slips around and gets a hold of that old Webster's blueback speller, and we hides it way in the night. And then we lights a little pine torch and studies that spelling book. We learn it too.
That morning, we all go to the cotton field early. And after a while, the old horn blow. And we all stop and listen, 'cause it was the wrong time of the day for the horn. We start chopping again, and there go the horn again. The lead man nigga say, "Hold up, we better go on in. That the horn." So we lines on up and go on in. Well, sitting in the gallery in a high-bottom chair was a man we never see before. He had a big old broad black hat, like the Yankees wore. Hair was plum gray, and so was his beard, and it came right there, down near his chest. And he say, "You darkies know what day it is." And the head man say, "No, we don't know." He say, "Well, this here the 4th day of June, and this here is 1865. And I want y'all to remember this date, 'cause you gon' always remember that date. Today, you is free, just like I is free, just like Mr. Sanders and your missus, and all us white people. I come to tell you," he say, "I wants to be sure you understand, 'cause you ain't gotta get up and go by the horn no more. You is your own bosses now. I wants to bless you and hope you is always happy till you got all the rights in life that any white people got." Then he got on his horse and ride away. It was the 4th day of June in 1865. I begins to live. I begins to live, begins to live.